GM, Ismael from Lagrange here. I'm joined by Matt from Caldera. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So, Matt, we're in Bangkok, DevCon. How has the conference been?
It's been great. This is, I think, the first conference I've had where I've literally been overbooked. Like, I need to turn down meetings. It seems like everyone is here. So, yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
It is, and Caldera is one of the hottest companies around right now. Is this your first DevCon, or were you...
I've been to DevConnect before, but not
wonderful.
DevCon proper.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And this year has been very big for Caldera. I've seen a bunch of announcements of new rollup partners. I'd love to know what the main developments this year have been for you.
Yeah, I think going back to last year, it was about like building the foundations, basically making sure that the core RaaS service worked.
Yeah.
And then this year, it was really just accelerating everything from the go-to-market and product development perspective. I think when we began the year, we were running like 2 chains on mainnet.
Yeah.
Now that number is a little over 20. So we account for 15 to 20% of all rollups, all L2s and L3s on top of Ethereum. It's on the product side, it's been integrating new stacks. We obviously doubled down on Arbitrum and OP. And we've also added ZK Sync as a new offering, and we've already started running ZK Sync mainnet chains. Actually, the first one was launched Wednesday of this week with Zerion.
Yeah.
And then the bigger theme for us as well has been this idea of we've solved horizontal scalability on Ethereum. Like, you can now launch a chain. It's like almost the easiest piece of crypto infrastructure to launch.
Yes,
like it's easier to have your own chain than to get an oracle deployed on that chain or get an indexer on that chain. And so now like the thing we're focused on is like, we call it connectivity internally. And it's basically just like, how do we make it easier for people to onboard value onto their chains? How do we make it easy for people to transfer value between these chains, transfer information between these chains, and also connect these chains outside of a Web3 context, like to the rest of the world? How do we get, again, an Oracle problem, right? How do we get data from the outside world onto chains? So we have all these under the same theme of kind of connectivity.
I love that. And so I've talked to you so many times, and I've known you for, I think, 1 or 2 years at this point.
Yep.
And I've never realized that 20 to 30% of the chains on Ethereum are deployed and are running by...
Yes.
That's fascinating. I think that's a number that's almost hard to comprehend when we think of this roll-up future, and we think of Caldera as the central figure in that. And so the Metalayer, I have a thesis that roll-up clusters are phenomenal designs by many of the top rollup teams, like Arbitrum, Optimism Superchain, ZK Sync Elastic Chain, Polygon Ag Layer. And then I think of Metalayer as this way that it spans all of these clusters, enabling new services that are agnostic of stack.
Exactly. And so, yeah, we think about it in exactly the same way. There are all these like really great innovations being built by the rollup teams. You know, some people would have wanted us to compete with those teams. I think that's a total losing game. Like, the kind of native interop standards for each of these teams, like it makes the most sense for those stacks to use them. But they're all incomplete solutions to the problem, I guess I should say. Like, you know, what every stack wants to say is a decade from now, we're going to be the only stack in town. And then our solution is perfect, right? If we connect all Optimism chains and Optimism is the only stack that anyone's using, great, we're done. Crypto always, not only is crypto just like highly multipolar, I think it always trends towards an increasing amount of like multipolarity. This technology it's built to enable like new upstarts to unseat incumbents, which means that the space actually just gets more and more dynamic over time. That's what we've seen with RaaS, right? For a time, due to like licensing and just kind of network effects, it literally started with just OP. And now there's like at least 5 to 6 credible rollup frameworks that people are using to like launch chains, and they're all like quite solid. And so we think not only will Ethereum continue to quote unquote like fragment a little bit across many more rollups, but across many more rollup stacks. In a world with many different stacks, you do need something to exist as a neutral, again, connectivity layer between all these different clusters. For there's like long tail interop routes. This was a problem that we were hearing from all of our teams. There didn't seem to be a great solution. And funnily enough, we realized the best people to work on this, just because we're maybe the only team in the space that has the experience actually running all of these different stacks.
20 to 30% of the rollups.
Exactly. From those first principles that led to us deciding to tackle this problem.
That's fascinating. And so one of the things I also want to touch on is this week, Zerion ZK Sync production. Is this the first example of a RaaS team launching a ZK Sync stack rollup in production?
Yes.
That's amazing. Congratulations. You are one of the few RaaS providers that works across both optimistic stacks and ZK stacks. Why did you choose to make an opinionated bet on also supporting ZK stacks?
Yeah, we just see ZK as the place where the industry is going.
Yeah.
I don't think this is that insane of a take. It's
No, it's
probably
not.
like the coldest take at this conference.
Yeah.
Really for us, I think both will continue to live on. But a lot of teams, they want the guarantees provided by ZK.
Yeah.
And from our perspective, it would seem silly for us to be making a bet here. Like we've always been very unopinionated and wanting to just serve customer demands wherever they are. And there's a lot of demand for ZK. It was a natural choice.
And this is something I think is very interesting. So a lot of teams are saying OP to ZK conversion. A lot of teams are also pushing for deploying on ZK stacks. How do you see the price sensitivity of customers towards ZK right now? Do you think we need several orders of magnitude decrease in cost before the average rollup developer wants to move to ZK? Or what's the blocking factor now?
Yeah, costs are a big one. I think right now, on a per transaction basis, you can probably get away with 1 cent per transaction improving costs, seems to be the rough estimate. That works for a lot of applications. Like for a team, Manta and ApeChain, which we both run, that are trying to build ecosystems, I could see them saying, okay, ZK makes sense to trade off with eventually at that price point. For a lot of the gaming and social chains we're working with, especially ones that are subsidizing a lot of gas costs for everyone and have a fairly low economic value per transaction, 1 cent is probably still a little bit too high, especially because it can be like completely unbounded.
Yeah.
And so 1 to 2 more orders of magnitude in reduction in proving costs will, I think, help ZK be dominant across like every single vertical.
That's fascinating. I really think that if we look at the trend that ZK is moving, unquestionably we should be there within 2 years, or roughly a 2 order of magnitude decrease in cost, if not more. I think both in innovation underlying proving systems, as well as hardware acceleration for existing proving systems, we should probably be able to get 2 orders of magnitude in 12 to 18 months just there, let alone anything else that we might not be able to anticipate right now. Matt, Lagrange and Caldera announcing very soon an exciting partnership that we're working on together. Decentralized proving for ZK rollups deploying on Caldera. I think you are the first or one of the first RaaS platforms to embrace decentralized proving as a way that the space is moving, right? We've developed all of these blockchains that have high guarantees of safety and high guarantees of liveness. We can deploy these programs that are unstoppable, right? We can deploy contracts that are unstoppable. We've moved to a rollup-centric future. And now, because of teams like you, there's the capacity to deploy rollups that are unstoppable, where the rollup is secured by the safety of the computation and validity proof, and then the liveness is guaranteed by a network doing that proving. So Matt, I'd love to know a little bit more about your thoughts on the future of decentralized proving for ZK rollups.
Yeah, I think this is one of the coolest innovations that are happening in this space right now, precisely because it's not decentralization for decentralization's sake. Like, candidly, if that was the only sales pitch for decentralized proving, we probably wouldn't have gone for it. Just because like we found our users, it's not that they don't care, but when you look at rollups right now, there are many other things that probably should be decentralized first rather than proving if you're just a decentralization maxi. But the thing that's most interesting to us is the fact that with decentralized proving, it introduces kind of market dynamics potentially into proving costs, which is really nice. Ideally, so we've already been speaking with some SaaS providers that offer proving. Ideally, they can be part of this network,
they will be.
But it's competitive, right? And we really like that. And it's competitive under a unified interface to participate in this network, where we're not like negotiating SLAs and like having to support different APIs, et cetera. And then the other thing there as well is just having just like more neutral infrastructure. Like this isn't something where we really want to like take a side or even be opinionated again. Some people are doing more software focused solutions for proving costs and people are doing like hardware solutions. Having a network means I think we can get all of those benefits permissionlessly without needing to think very deeply and try to make these very directional opinionated bets on what the future of ZK is going to look like.
I think there's a point that you mentioned there that is very prescient, and that is that centralized proving providers can participate in the centralized markets such that rollup teams and rollup providers don't actually have to engage and evaluate the plurality of centralized proving providers, since the market dynamics already optimize for reduction in cost, reduction in latency, and performance. And I think that's one of the areas that people often don't appreciate when it comes to decentralized proving. This kind of concept that free and open markets and permissionless markets converge to better pricing for end users at scale.
Yeah.
And so specifically in the context of our work together, one other area I think is very unique is the fact that this is a Caldera-specific portion of the network. It is effectively a subnetwork or supernet for Caldera. And so it really is, in our mind, kind of this embodiment of the fact that what you build is a sovereign ecosystem. This is not Lagrange's ecosystem. This is the Caldera ecosystem. The proving space that operates there is something that you need agency over, and you have the right to have agency over.
Yeah, I think that's very in line with the ethos we have. Like when we're pitching to our customers, right? It's important to have some amount of sovereignty, something you can call your own. I think proving networks probably have different concerns than general blockchains and block space providers, but having a place where, even just from a brand perspective, we can provide best-in-class service and also be fairly opinionated about how this network looks, potentially feels to other users is really important to us. And then as well, I think one of the nice things, we get approached all the time by people who are offering proving solutions. So having hey, this is like where Caldera is doing its proofs. Is a great way for us to see if those players are serious. Like we can say, great, you want to do proofs for Caldera, plug into this network. The demand for proofs will only expand over time on this network. And so it's a really easy way to accomplish all of those goals.
I totally agree. It also means that you don't have to be the one evaluating ZK innovation.
Exactly.
Like things like hardware acceleration, GPU acceleration, a lot of those teams will be integrating and deploying on top of Lagrange's subnetwork stacks. And that means that they can easily plug into you. You can check their performance. And if they're winning auctions and they're generating proofs, fantastic. They get revenue, they get profits on the margin that they can save in cost reduction, lower cost for everybody. And so I think that you being on the forefront of that is once again a very kind of prescient move to really offer a very differentiated and hopefully improved UX and DX for people building alongside Caldera. And so one of the other areas I wanted to chat a little bit about was Caldera more broadly. When you think about how the Caldera ecosystem as a whole evolves from where we are right now, which is you have 20 to 30 production rollups. You're one of the largest RaaS providers on Ethereum, one of the largest entities responsible for the orchestration of rollups on Ethereum. Where is Caldera in 2 years?
We want to be the biggest provider of block space on Ethereum or just in blockchains in general. That's been the goal. That will always be the goal. Ideally, in 2 years, not only are we running way more chains, but the next applications that are being built on blockchains, including the ones for mass adoption, those are happening powered by Caldera infrastructure, right? So again, we're not in talks with them at all, purely as an example. But when Visa wants to launch their payment network rails on blockchain, we want to be the one that's doing that. So that's always been the North Star. I think for us right now, we are going through a transformation from a services provider to more of an ecosystem. And that's been really deliberate for us, partially just because we've realized a lot of our users want this. We've always taken this approach of being very helpful on the go-to-market sense. And we've always cultivated a community of early technology adopters that we can funnel to our users. Just having a super engaged community and more ecosystem level strategy, we think is going to be really helpful going forward. We want to be the place that everyone comes to when they're thinking about developing Web3 applications. That involves some of the interop stuff we're doing, some of the proving stuff we're doing, and in general, a lot of the cross-team collaborations, that we're doing and that we have done. Ideally, we're working with everybody, and everybody's coming to us when they want to develop real mass market Web3 applications.
I love that. One of the things that I really liked that I've been seeing with you guys on socials was this long list of partners across almost every single vertical that a rollup could integrate with, across sequencing, across DA, across Oracle providers, that it's really almost like a library that a team developing with you can pick from. How do you, as a founder, go about evaluating and closing that degree of optionality for people in your ecosystem?
So this is, I think, classic network effects business. At the start, it was very difficult, and now it's very easy because, candidly, everyone wants to work with us because we help provide distribution. And where a lot of innovation is happening in terms of at least new chains right now. from a business perspective, it's fairly easy to do those kind of light touch integrations, like helping those teams get discovered. The way we want to evolve that going forward is we're looking to be a little bit more opinionated about infrastructure providers, what chains like should do, who they should be working with, et cetera. And with the end goal of basically creating really strong bundles that chains can use if they need certain sets of services. And then on the other side, basically being the distribution channel for vast swaths of the Web3 infrastructure stack. Because again, it's like the biggest challenge of any company, but especially Web3 infrastructure, is distribution. We want to help those teams as much as possible who are building really good solutions get their first set of customers.
And I love the opinionated approach that you're talking about right now, because I think one of the interesting positions that you're in as one of the largest RaaS providers is that you are a steward in many ways of a lot of these teams deploying block space, where I don't necessarily know if the average team deploying a game can really correctly understand the difference between DA layers, the difference between sequencing layers, the security assumptions on oracles. And in many ways, I would assume they would defer to you guys who have already pre-evaluated the domain of possible solutions.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, just because, first of all, we don't want to overexert our own opinion. And in many cases, I think it's often helpful to be fairly unopinionated as a company. But I agree with you. There are certain times where, given we've launched dozens of chains, we know what works, we know what doesn't. And so I like to think of ourselves definitely as a steward in some respects, and at other times, just a really valuable thought partner for these teams that are launching chains. And in both of those roles, we're able to be quite helpful in terms of these chains figuring out how exactly they want to accomplish their goals.
That makes sense. And so another area I wanted to touch on is interop. I think the architectures of interop are just so vast right now, all the way from intent-based solutions to ZK-based interop to economic or attestation-based designs, like we see with Layer 0 currently or with Axler, all the way to the atomicity of these designs with what we're seeing with like Metalayer, AgLayer, Elastic Chain, et cetera. Where do you see interop going? How do you see that space evolving, and where do you think different solutions are going to ossify?
Yeah, I think we're going to see more of just like a kind of layered approach here. This is something that we're very comfortable with. I think most interop players are very uncomfortable with because like their business models don't really account for it. But the way that I see interop right now, it's actually fairly similar to the way that I would see the financial system of the world, where you have some like very kind of base layer, like localized infrastructure, right? Like you have like ACH on one end, it's like Swift. And then ideally, maybe we can settle on some standards, right? These are like the international wired transfers, right? These are like the EIPs. But really, like I think where a lot of the value is going to accrue in interop are people that can build systems that are a little higher level and like abstract away a lot of this complexity. There are going to be intent-based solutions that work. There are going to be more attestation-based solutions that work. There are going to be like 2 out of 3 multi-sig things that work for certain players. And then the important thing is actually just providing abstractions on top of that, while acknowledging the different risk profiles, maybe or finality profiles of all these different solutions. It's able to actually just like provide a unified interface to a user that's just like, I want to move this thing from A to B. And so for us in particular, what that means is developing our solution to be fairly universal, at the very least across major public chains and the chains that we run. That means we're not doing highly opinionated atomic sequencer types of things. So our thing will look a little bit more generic. But from a user experience perspective, we want to default to some notion of the best interop available for any given route. So when people are using this concept that we're building, like the Metalayer, right? When people are using that to move value from one ZK Sync chain to another, like ideally that just goes through ZK Sync's Elastic Chain. And then if they want to move across different clusters, that'll involve our system. Right now, our system, it looks technically a little bit more similar to a Hyperlane or Layer 0. We're actually collaborating with Hyperlane on it, but using the fact that we're running sequencers to do like very cool stuff around pre-confirmations and like faster security guarantees and that sort of thing. So from a developer's perspective, it'll look fairly similar, like generic message passing with a bunch of like bells and whistles on top.
I love that. And I think that when you have these markets for interoperability that allow users to express security preferences and price preferences, you're able to have these heterogeneity of underlying solutions that each can address some subset of the market.
Exactly.
And I think collectively what you're able to do is better discriminate on price and therein be able to capture much more market value. And I think this is why we've seen a lot of the major cross-chain players try to create these kind of modular underlying designs.
Exactly.
That if an application is using the Metalayer and it's moving over a route that has a canonical interop solution established here, ZK sync to ZK sync, it actually will default to potentially the Elastic Chain interop.
Yes, that's 100% our goal.
Yes.
We don't want to compete with what we view are the best solutions for any given kind of tightly coupled cluster.
Yes.
I think that's like a hugely losing game.
Yeah.
But we also don't really mind that because I think a lot of the value in interop is actually going to be something more universal. And then also, ideally, that universal thing will cover more long tail interop opportunities. And that is really interesting to us because, first of all, I think the kind of revenue opportunities there are significantly higher.
It is.
And also, when you think of interop as like the classic example of a network with network effects, like the value of the network is proportional to like the number of participants or the number of routes in the network. So being able to have a design that is fairly unopinionated about these types of things internally, like to say, we're not building like ACH, we're like trying to build plaid. And it might, like the design from an engineering perspective will look a little bit less clean than like one of these like highly opinionated things. What that means is we can actually provide the best experience for users, which is at the end of the day what we just want to do.
Yeah, I love that. And so when you think about the role that the network effects around Caldera will play in the future of the rollup space, broadly speaking, on Ethereum, I've long felt that there are two areas in crypto that create network effects at scale. That is users and liquidity.
Yeah.
And we can look at most applications that have been durable in crypto as having compounding effects around either users or liquidity as they've scaled. And I see the kind of the Metalayer establishes kind of defensibility around those two axes.
Yes.
A user of a Metalayer chain or chains in the Metalayer would be more willing to use another chain in the Metalayer potentially.
Exactly.
Because of a trust in the underlying experience and what they've done. And also liquidity, right? If we look at, for example, the super chain, and we look at the sequencer fee distribution that's required, the sequencer fee outlay that's required to be part of that, the reason that many rollups opt into that, at least to my perspective, is because of base and because of the liquidity established on OP stack. And we'll see the same thing obviously replicated on other stacks as well.
Yep.
And so when you see why rollups would opt into the Metalayer at scale, is it those effects or is there something I might be missing in my framing there?
Yeah, I think those effects are it. The only other thing I'll add is things around token go-to-market. This is included within liquidity for sure, but really one of the challenges people have now when they're launching their own chain is getting a token out to as many kind of liquidity venues as possible. So again, interop is going to be very helpful for that, at least on the on-chain side. And then as well, you mentioned users. We're really focused on making the developer experience for user-facing applications as seamless as possible. Our goal with this is we have wallets coming to us fairly frequently that are like, we want to integrate Caldera, and having like standards that all the chains follow in terms of interop is going to be really helpful for us to onboard. There's user-facing applications, which again, to your point, comes back to users, right? And then really want to be able to say, hey, if you use Caldera, you're just going to have more users and you're going to have more value on your chains. Exactly with like what you're saying, users and liquidity. And if we get to that point, I think like we've won the space. So you're totally correct. That's the end goal.
I appreciate that. And I think directionally, the way that you've gone about building Caldera, I just find it incredibly exciting. Have you thought about native asset issuance on Metalayer? Is that something that would be interesting to you, or is that something that you think is not necessarily in the cards?
We've certainly thought about it.
Yeah.
I think really what we want to do is we want to make launching like a token on any chain on the Metalayer feel native to all the other chains, rather than have the Metalayer itself be like that venue for native assets. That might change over time. I think practically these are very similar, but V0 we're just focused on like the core interop pieces.
Yeah, makes total sense. And one of the things that I think is fascinating as well is we're talking about kind of intent-based designs. And a lot of the fees in intent-based designs come from the cost of capital that surrounds the assets they have to hold. And many of them are actually holding like a stable asset like USDC or ETH that they'll then remit on native interop solution between chains to try to swap into whatever the local asset that people want to use to settle a trade is. And in that case, the cost of capital is proportionate to the asset that they can move along secure canonical paths. And so that's only USDC, the hurdle rate is substantially higher than if you can start having other baskets of assets that can be securely moved in something like Metalayer. So I think when these things start composing, what you get is these holistically cheaper solutions for users.
Exactly.
And so another thing I want to talk about is a little bit about the framing of a RaaS platform as across the spectrum of people deploying, right? There's people who want to deploy in one click, and there's people who you have very deep relationships with. Maybe some of them have deployed in one click, but just have progressed into a very deep relationship with Caldera. How do you see the customers of Caldera sitting on that spectrum?
Yeah, we've always been highly opinionated. Deploy in one click to test. When you're going to mainnet, talk to us. That won't be the case forever. We have strategically, like, it's always been in our roadmap to constantly, like, we just constantly reevaluate this. And like, it will be on the roadmap to do one-click mainnet deployments at some point in time. At this point in time, it's like, first of all, the number of chains being launched weekly is not so high that we can't talk to everybody. And also just deciding to launch your own chain as a Web3 project, it's still the most consequential infrastructure decision you will ever make as a team. Like, we want to be involved with that. We want to help those teams. We want to make sure they're thinking about it in like a mature way, because it doesn't help any of us. We would make some extra revenue, but I think in the long term, it wouldn't help us to just have a bunch of chains launching that then die very quickly because people realize they launched it for the wrong reasons. So in our customer base, we're very heavily weighted towards the teams that we think are thinking about this in a very mature way and that we can help and work with closely. Again, over time, that will change. We're already seeing some teams, especially on the gaming side, that will need multiple chains. And for that, then we get into the point where instant, like one-click or API-based like mainnet deployments are helpful, right? I like to think, imagine if League of Legends was like on-chain or something similar, every game might be like an ephemeral rollup, right? We are getting to that point in some cases. So if I had to guess, like within the next year or so, we'll support this, but it will probably still be behind some sort of wall because like mainnets are just, it's important to take those seriously.
It is.
The other thing we've seen as well is just like hack risk. We actually have seen some L2s that rug, but the deposits aren't actually going into an L2. We have seen rug pulls there. For us, because we're so focused on rollup governance decentralization, we do need to be a little bit more careful on who we service because we don't want to help anyone do a rug pull. So we do a little bit of KYC, KYB, like stuff as well when we're working with teams. And again, that involves generally some more face-to-face interaction.
That makes total sense. And so I guess when you think about the sectors that you're the most excited for seeing new rollups launch in, where do you think we're going to see the most growth? Like what chains do you think are going to really inflect over the next year?
Yeah. So the constant kind of undercurrent, I think, in the space is going to be like these kind of community specific chains. Like our biggest chains, I think, follow this, right? Like Manta, Kinto, ApeChain. They're all trying to become platforms for people to develop new things on, and they each will have a different focus, geographically, vertical wise, community wise. But like we call them community chains or thesis specific chains, but they're more still general purpose. That will always be like an interesting sector for the reasons you mentioned, because they become hubs for users and liquidity. There's always something valuable to be built there. In terms of the new categories I'm really interested in, I think a lot of the activity and transaction volume will come from gaming. We're already seeing this. Like, again, like some of our gaming chains, they don't even show up in our TVL metrics, but in our unique wallets and our transaction metrics, they're at the top. And so in terms of like actual usage, gaming and then eventually social, maybe deep in, I'm really excited about. And then on the value side, I'm really excited about payments. Again, not a hot take, but everyone is excited about Web3 payments. And for a lot of these more kind of verticalized payments infrastructure, I think they're all going to realize very quickly that having your own chain is the right way to go.
Yes.
And so I'm excited for that influx of activity to happen relatively soon.
I think consumer gaming payments,
Yeah.
all of these things were areas that we've talked about in crypto, talked about getting traction, and they're the ones that are the most price sensitive to block space.
Exactly.
And I think those are the ones that are the most primed to, as we see increased retail and consumer interest in crypto, start to really inflect as well.
Exactly.
And as a final kind of question about Caldera, if someone wanted to work with you guys and they said, hey, saw Matt talking, I really loved the way he was describing kind of the rollup ecosystem that's being developed on the Metalayer, on Caldera, and I want to be a rollup deploying there. What should they do? How do they get in touch? How do they build with you guys?
Yeah, we're very easy to get in touch with. So
I can attest to that.
Yes. This will probably not be the case for much longer, but if any error happens on our like public dashboard, it literally just pops up with like my Telegram. So I have people messaging me throughout the day, and they can attest. I'm fairly active support-wise still. But yeah, go to the website, caldera.xyz. We have a dashboard you can use to launch a testnet if you want to. We also just have a button you can click to book time with our team. And we like to talk with teams as early as possible, help them think through the architecture and the possibilities of building your own chain. And then we'll go from there. But yeah, we're very accessible. Or just find me at a conference. I'm around. I've been going to more and more of them.
I love that. And so as a final question, I always like to end with this. DevCon, a lot of cool projects, a lot of not cool projects. What is one hot take that you have from this conference?
Do you mean about the conference or just
About anything?
About anything? I think Ethereum's fine. There's a lot of negative sentiment around Ethereum, mostly driven by comparisons to Solana.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, I actually think a lot of this sort of similar discontent, it mirrors, I like to call it like America versus Singapore, right? Which are both great countries. I view Solana as like Singapore, a little more top-down, very efficient, very prescriptive. And they're like, just like how in this comparison, there are like a lot of Americans who wish America could become Singapore. America and Ethereum are not well designed in a way where they could become something like that. And so I think long-winded way of getting to this take, which is like Ethereum, the point of Ethereum is that innovation can happen from all sorts of teams. With L2's like base layer protocol innovation is happening across many different teams. That's going to lead to an incredible amount of anti-fragility in the Ethereum ecosystem. If, for example, let's say there was an amazing smart contract VM that was like invented and it's just obviously better than every other one for some way. Like, where would that be? It'd be on Ethereum right now. It'd be launched as an L2. And I think, for that reason, Ethereum is like totally fine. I guess the corollary to that is like, people should not expect, and they should not be the EF to like be actually the main steward of that innovation. And they shouldn't be disappointed when the EF is focused on other things, because there are teams like us and all the teams we work with that are taking up the mantle, and Ethereum will be fine.
I love that. That's a very thoughtful take.
Thank you.
In essence, the nature of Ethereum being decentralized creates a market that teams can pursue opportunities within, that by having a private sector of businesses building on Ethereum rather than just a foundation means that the things that are built are more durable because they're built in highly competitive environments.
Exactly. That's a much more concise way of putting it.
I wouldn't have been able to make a concise way if you hadn't explained the point in such detail. I love that. Frankly, that's something I actually really believe as well. And I think that the way you articulated that and comparing US and Singapore, which I think are very tangible examples of that in another sphere, is very apt.
Yes. And for the same reason, I'm actually quite glad that the EF isn't trying to do like blockchain product innovation. In the same way, I'm glad the American government isn't trying to be too involved with investing the sovereign wealth of the country, because I think both they're not well suited for it. And I'm glad I think the EF recognizes that. So maybe the hottest take is, I really hope people stop calling for that to happen, because if it does happen, I think it could be quite disastrous. Because EF, I don't think they're meant to be too focused on DeFi innovation, for example.
I think that's very true. And you look at most other L1s, there's not a market for infrastructure development then, right? We wouldn't build a client. There wouldn't be any market for building a client.
Exactly.
You wouldn't build sequencing and proving and any of this stuff, because it's really build apps or find somewhere else to go.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you so much for this very thoughtful conversation. And I'm excited to work together with Caldera, and I'm excited to hopefully do more of these at another conference soon.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Likewise.
Great.